You on?
I am here, ready to
All
go
right.
as soon as you guys are.
All right.
All right, yeah, let's go ahead and get started today. Thank you guys all for hopping on. I want to first introduce myself. My name is Kyle Rigg. Not to get confused with the other Kyle that is with Pineco. Some of you may have worked with him before. I'm the newer Kyle. I originally am from Oregon, and I am now based out of Bozeman, Montana, where kind of our company's based out of. Um, but yeah, Pineco, we were founded in 1930 or 1993, not 33, 1993. So we've been doing business for about 30 years now. We started in kind of rural Montana and Wyoming and have since grown clear into Oregon and Washington, Idaho, the Dakotas, Nebraska, Colorado. But with still the majority of our customers being in the Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah area, kind of covering the Rockies. We support over 25,000 users every single day. And kind of what we specialize in is we say we specialize in solving complex IT issues, basically meaning we will come in from the pre-sales side, evaluate what you have now, and then put together something. And then we will also help install and configure it. And so this ranges from everything from network infrastructure to communication to physical security with cameras, access controls, sensors, and then also student safety in schools. And then obviously cybersecurity, which is why we are all here today. So with that, I want to turn it over to Mark, who is going to be presenting from Adlumin, sorry.
Great, thanks very much, Kyle. Thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Mark Sangster. I'm Vice President and Chief of Strategy with Adlumin, and also the author of No Safe Harbor, The Inside Truth about Cybercrime and How to Protect Your Business. And today I'm going to talk about a phrase that I use a lot, which is that ignorance is not bliss when it comes to cybersecurity, that often it's liability or negligence. And that's why it's important to build resilience against the various cyber threats that we see. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use several movie references just to kind of keep it entertaining, to set the stage for some of the key kind of elements that we need to address when it comes to building resilience. And here's the first one, right? And so this is, if anybody recognizes this one, it's a little tricky. The person in the background is the giveaway in this one. That's Alec Baldwin from The Hunt for Red October. And this is the fictitious Admiral Painter quote, saying this business will get out of control and we'll be lucky to live through it. And okay, that's a touch of an exaggeration because of course they're talking about a fictitious conflict between the United States at the time and the Soviet Union, I guess, before it was broken up into the various states and Russia. But it's important to think about this in cybersecurity in terms of business, because it is a business risk to manage. It is not simply an IT problem to solve. You can't throw a box at it or buy a service and call it a day, right? This is really about understanding what your obligations are, generally based on the kind of assets that you have and the type of business or organization that you practice, right? And the real challenge that we often see, and I think this is, I believe, Kyle, you were sort of raising this and asking me this question, right, is, who are the prime targets and why does this occur? And what we find with the businesses that we have and our client base, and not just our client base, but in the general population of the economy, it's small to medium-sized organizations that are a prime target. And you can look at this data in several ways. The first is insurance claims as an example. And that's what they show, is that about 3/4 of these major events that occur, the ones that require a rebuild based on insurance, happens to small, medium-sized organizations across all sorts of different industries, right? Whether that's community banks or law firms or community healthcare clinics and facilities, manufacturers, transportation companies, local and state government, education, and so on, right? And regardless of the kind of business or services that they practice, there's some common factors. One is they're facing those increasing cyber threats. We'll talk a little bit about those in a minute. But they're bookended or almost trapped in a vice between that and the opposite, which is increasing compliance demands. And so compliance always sort of reacts to the threats, right? And we see this, that there's new rules new obligations. So for example, the FTC, I think in June, their cybersecurity safety rules are about to come into place, right? Which means that other organizations that have a sort of a pseudo financial practice, so money lenders and some real estate, car dealerships and so on, the ones that have a loans office will have to actually meet these standards. So it is getting harder and harder from that perspective. And of course, they're trying to do this with decreasing capacity or exhausted resources, and generally a decreasing budget, or at least if it's not decreasing, it is not keeping pace with the type of spend that's required to protect them. And that's where Adlumin comes in, right? We do this for over 400 customers with about 600 billion in assets under management across all those different industry pillars that I just talked about. And our job is to shed light on those threats, to expose the vulnerabilities within your IT environment, to allow you to command that greater visibility, right? To stop those threats, to contain them. And really the point in doing this is to prevent them from becoming business disrupting, right? The kind of things that we read in the headlines, right? The major data breaches, the operational shutdowns because of ransomware, and so on. And I get asked all the time, why does this happen, right? Why do we still see, we spend all this money and we see companies still fall victim, even when we're also now starting to see law enforcement, policing, and government action start to take these groups down, right? Like Conti's been taken down, DarkSide, which of course was associated with the Colonial Pipeline attack. Hive was another very active gang that morphed out of Conti and a couple of others. And then some of those dark markets as well, right, are also, we're seeing breakups occur. So why are these things still happening? Well, if I used another analogy, pick any other form of crime like drug trade and narcotics as an example. We have a lot of law enforcement and government resources put behind trying to stop that. At the end of the day, these things are still on our streets. So there's a certain amount that we're going to be able to control and a certain amount that, you know, is unfortunately going to fall between those cracks that in a cybersecurity perspective, you have to look after. But the number one reason I often say that companies fall prey is that they're simply not prepared, that they labor under a bunch of misconceptions about what kind of risks they face and how the threats are going to manifest when they appear on the door. So this leads me to my second movie reference, and the quote about the greatest trick that the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist. And this, of course, came from Roger Verbal Kint, or his other persona, which was Kaiser Soze, right? And again, a bit of an exaggeration, but not really when we think about it, right? Because I hear this time and time again. We had nothing we're stealing. You know, we sell cars as an example, right? We're, you know, what would we have in this small town municipality? That breaches happen as a result of mistakes. And frankly, I think that's just a simple get out of jail free card, right? The assumption that the headlines are written about companies that had poor performance, that didn't spend where they needed to, that bought the wrong resources or didn't know what they were doing. That's just an easy way of allaying your own fears and saying, well, look, I think we're doing a good job. We have smart people and so on. So therefore, you know, we're proofed against this type of attack. And that's not true. Bad things also happen to good people. Bad things happen to good companies. And that's important to remember. The no signs prior to the attack, that one is just 100% wrong, and I'll talk about that later. And then this one, we have insurance and backups, is also, unfortunately, an overstatement, right? It creates a sense of confidence. Insurance might cover you. It depends. It's a lot more complicated than that. There I sound like a lawyer. Same thing with your backups, right? It's not as simple, and there is no light switch that you flick. You don't get a check from the insurer and bang, your business is back and operating after it's been shut down by ransomware. And often when you're dealing with that, using backups, restoring for backups, dealing with rebuilds and so on, I often find that what happens is companies struggle because the old legacy kind of tech that they're now going to replace does not play well with the new tech, right? So you move to like M365, you move to the cloud as an example, and suddenly some of the other core systems that you were using that were very specific, often custom built for your business, like a new municipality or manufacturer or something, don't work. And now there's a lot of investment to upgrade or replace those systems as well. So when it comes to cybercrime, and I'm not going to belabor this because I think everybody's seen this, right? But the reality is that I want you to take away from this is that these organizations operate like a Fortune 500 company, right? In fact, I call them the Misfortune 500 because they have structured organizations with a C-suite and recruiting capabilities and talent management and all those kind of things that you would have. But they also build technology like ransomware that they resell as a service through a license or through profit sharing. And what that means is they can get more mileage in terms of revenue out of their operational expenditures developing these things, right? So think about that in terms of R&D, right? When you reduce your operational costs and you increase your revenue, that's profit by any definition. They're often state sponsored. They're really good at going after your supply chain or going and poisoning the well, as I talk about. So things like SolarWinds, Kaseya, Microsoft Hafnium attacks, there's a whole whack of these where they've gone right into the development environment and poisoned it with their own malware so that a trusted source delivers it. And then the same thing with sophistry, and that's sort of the trickery of using your own strengths and tools against you. And we're seeing more and more of that. We call it living off the land, right? This is where they're actually using the security tools you put in place to create those remote access and a sort of a protected, secure tunnel from your business to their bad guy world so that they can do whatever it is that they want to do. And here's some quick examples. And this is what I want you to also understand. They understand your business. Odds are somebody's gotten really good at targeting your type of company or your industry or institution or whatever it might be. Like, let's pick on education for a minute. Once they've done this a few times, they've built phishing lures that are effective to collect credentials. They know typically what systems to use. So they know where the data and the things that they want to steal, where they're located and how to access them and what general security and administrative controls are around them. So this isn't the junk nonsense kind of stuff like Netflix telling you your credit card's been rejected, or your bank asking you to update your security, or a courier telling you you've got a package from your aunt that's coming for Christmas, whatever it might be, right? And I'm just going to show you some quick examples. This first one is a criminal that posed as a professional student in a graduate school looking for a mentor after they did some work with the target individuals. They sent them this email and said, hey, thanks so much. Would you mind clicking on the link and completing this academic survey so that I get credit? And of course, that was stolen from a reputable school, and that was their way of injecting malware into the target's environment. In other cases, we've seen this go around industries where they've tailored it based on publicly available information. So things like lawsuits is an example, court filings. They figure out what law firms were representing which parties, right? The plaintiff and the defendant. And then they put together fake safe rooms. They put together notifications that say your organization is being sued by one of your competitors, your competitor's owner, their parent company, and here's all the information you need. And if you've ever been involved in these, what they're presenting to you is quite legitimate, not just in the sense of content, but the way it's presented and sort of the process that you go through. So again, if you understand this stuff, you'd look at it and go, well, okay, this is exactly how this plays out. My CEO is probably going to read it, the CFO likely is going to read it, and then they're going to flip it to their legal counsel. And now all three are owned. They'll go after your tech stack. And when you're making changes, they're often doing things like trying to inject into M365 sign-ons. And it's easy for them to flip out a message that says, hey, you got to relog on. And they do that. And of course, your credentials are not being encrypted. They pick up your username and your password, but then they smartly pass that on to the Azure servers, which then authenticate you. And then whatever Microsoft service you were looking to do, like Office or Word or Excel or whatever it is, opens just as you'd expect. So you have no idea that a man in the middle did something. And this last one is more nasty, in fact, and we've seen this where they're actually using Google Analytics to determine what kind of documents and resources and so on that executives in different industries look for. And once they understand what kind of the top things are that you might search for, whatever that is, like some kind of templates, contracts, employment contracts, payroll, pay scales, anything along those lines, they steal those documents, they weaponize them, they plant them back on an unwitting server. So, it's some website that's serving this stuff up, doesn't realize it's been poisoned, or they set up their own, sounds like they use two N's, as in Norman instead of one M as in masquerade, and now you don't realize you're going to the wrong site and you're now downloading a weaponized document. So this doesn't even come to knock on your door. You've gone out to get this one. And these guys are sophisticated. Bootloader is a major ransomware gang that's been doing this stunt. They've been doing this now for several years. They've gotten really strong and they're really good at it. And I mentioned earlier, I said something about, you know, one of the misconceptions is that there were no signs, right? And this is the notion of, well, on Friday everything was great, and you know, on Monday when we came back to work, everything was shut down. And that's simply not true. And there's another piece of that by extension that's also important. It's another get out of jail free card. It's this notion of, look, we're a small, you know, we're a municipality somewhere, we're an educational institution, a small community bank. We don't have the wherewithal to defend ourselves if, you know, this nasty Russian ransomware gang comes a calling, or, you know, some Chinese, you know, state-sponsored actor or the Chinese army, you know, tries to attack us. Like, how are we going to defend ourselves? And, you know, to some degree, that's kind of, you know, it's accurate, right? But the reality is, even these big sophisticated actors use very simplistic methods, and we call them TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures. So it is things like stealing credentials and selling them on the dark web, or other confidential information that's been stolen and is available that would help a criminal socialize your environment, right? To engineer you to figure out how can they present something that will be effective in getting you to surrender your credentials, as an example, or to give them some other access because they see you as a supply chain partner or a customer, something along those lines. And so they get in, and we often see this with, you know, things like I said, stolen credentials, you know, multiple concurrent logins where it's not possible for two people in, you know, in very distant time zones to have logged in within a short period of time or concurrently, right? We know that's impossible travel. Failed multi-factor authentication attempts, things like that. And then it gets deeper, right? Now we start to see unusual remote traffic because they're using your own VPN, or often they use RDP and PowerShell, the tools that are built into your operating environments that are used for this purpose, so that an administrator can remotely make changes to a system. And those tools make sense when they're used properly. The problem is, it's when they're abused like this. So there's lots of things. Then we get into the yellow. Now they're starting to do bad stuff. They're collecting data. They're downloading malware. They're trying to disable defenses. All that stuff has occurred long before we get to that red bar where we're talking about data being wiped, ransomware being deployed, payloads of stolen data being pulled out. And then we get into the magenta bar, and now we're talking about the business outcome, right? The operational disruption, the ransomware payments, the stolen assets, the reputational damage, and the financial penalties that you pay. There were plenty of signs. And the problem is, generally, that these are going to be found by the incident response firm that's brought in by your insurer when you make a claim. And it's a bit of a good news, bad news. The bad news is, I just showed you, they do lots of things. They're quite capable. They know how to live off the land. They use legitimate systems, etc. The good news in this is that they're using these systems and they're living off the land and they're in your environment and they're leaving all these things, footprints, motion, right? There's I call them inferential signs and signals that they are in your environment. Implicit would be, you know, your antivirus kicks off and says, hey, I just found malware, right? Or your endpoint blocks activity because that's known to be a precursor to ransomware, or your firewall blocks something because it's just known bad, or it's coming from a bad source. But the inferential stuff is the smoke without the fire. That's the stuff where you've got to dig in and investigate. So the good news is here, if you know what you're looking for, you can stop them in those earlier bands towards the left of the screen before it turns into something that's bad, something that's metastasized throughout your organization and becomes business disrupting. And I wanted to deal with that other misconception, the last one that I just talked about, the one about insurance and backups and paying ransoms. And this is from a movie that's a lot harder to recognize, and kudos if anybody throws this one in the questions or the chat if they know it. But how terrible is the wisdom when it brings no profit to the wise? And this is the character Louis Cypher. I think you can figure that out if you run the two names together quickly enough, from the movie Angel Heart. And it's an old kind of noir, I think, from the 80s, and it's an interesting story. But the point is here, a lot of times customers will say, or victims will say, look, we have insurance, and look, worst case, we're just gonna pay the ransom. Well, that's getting a lot harder, right? You really have to understand, will paying a ransom accelerate the recovery? I worked with a manufacturing firm where it didn't, right? Still months later, they still hadn't recovered fully. It was, as I called it, business as usual, but just by candlelight. You have to determine whether you can pay the ransom anymore, because the Department of Treasury has sanctions lists that effectively say, if the recipients on this list, they're a known terrorist group, they're an enemy of state, this is trading with the enemy, this is funding known terrorists, you can't do that. It's now a federal offense. And you also have to file what's called SAR, which is a suspicious activity report. Then you got to claim those losses. You have to determine whether, like I said, is paying the ransom going to work? Getting a proof of life, which in this case is showing that the decryption keys will actually unlock the files that they've stolen. Transferring the funds and dealing with all that. Working with law enforcement. Often you have to bring in law enforcement to do the attribution piece, which is that, okay, let's figure out who the bad guy is so we can determine if, back to number 2, are they a party we can pay? And if they're not a party, if they've been blacklisted, what are we going to do? How are we going to figure out how to manage this? And then going through all the other steps right up to reporting it to a regulator, or sometimes to customers, depending on what's contractually in play, and then managing the damage of that. It is not a light switch. Like I said, you can't just cut a check and make this better. And your insurer is looking at all these steps. That's part of what they're going to do. So it's far more complex. You cannot be hit on the weekend and say by Tuesday we're up and running again. It may take months to get there, and trust me, it is extremely stressful. And that's why a lot of companies are turning to services, security services, that can kind of that do MTR or MDR, managed detection response, or sometimes called MTR now, managed threat response, which is this idea of, I need to be able to monitor for these things, to pick up these early signs and signals, the precursor that Mark talked about. When I find them, being able to investigate them, run them to ground, and if there is something dangerous here, containing it and stopping or disrupting it before it affects my business. And so the problem with these categories is that, for anybody who's in this on the technical side knows, there's EDR and MDR and XDR and MEDR, and I'm sure we'll keep filling the alphabet soup can, right? Like, it's just getting more and more frustrating, and that's one of the challenges. And in fact, I have a document, a white paper coming out on this topic in the next week, because of, there's so many questions saying, I don't understand how they all relate to each other, which one's right for me, and so on. So we try to create a sort of a simple, explanation to set them all in their place, to, to say what their strengths and weaknesses are, and then, provide a bit of a guideline to say, look, I'm not going to tell you what the right answer is, but I'm going to help you define your requirements, and then based on those requirements, that's going to kind of tell you which one's right for you. The other challenge with MDR and this whole category of threat management is that years ago, like 5 to 8 years ago when it was created, everyone was like, they just needed these threats managed, right? And they needed this stuff resolved. And they were willing to sacrifice anything else, like cost, visibility into their own environment, reporting capability, compliance reporting, and so on. So they were often black boxes where the technology that these MDR services use can't be decoupled from the security operations, the threat hunting and the analysis and the investigation part of it, of their business. And so the problem is, it's a little bit like, next one, Wizard of Oz, right? I've twisted the quote a little bit, right? But it's pay no attention to the wizard behind the curtain. Is that behind the curtain, behind this MDR curtain, when you open it, there's 20 levers and buttons. And that's why a lot of this stuff is decoupled and not available directly to the customer, because they can't do it in a streamlined single pane of glass fashion, which means when you say, hey, my board needs to know about this latest threat, can you tell me what you saw in our environment? They're going to your endpoint, they're going to logs, they're going to your firewalls, they're going to your Active Directory, to a whole bunch of places in your environment, and then trying to pull all that together to build you some kind of PowerPoint or PDF type of report. And really, that was okay 5 to 8 years ago, like let's call it 10 years ago. It's not acceptable anymore. We have to, literally, we got to be able to eat our cake and have it too, right? We have to be able to have these threats managed, but have direct visibility into what is happening. And the reason for that is, as cybersecurity has become more important to the top of the company, to the C-suite, and to the board, they want greater visibility, right? And no longer can we say, hey, listen, we're willing to make the sacrifice because these guys are saving us, keeping us safe. And at the same time, as compliance standards grow, these companies are also having to report. They have to attest. They have to go through examinations and audits. And so they need access to this data. And that's where it's gotten frustrating. And that's why I say, next movie quote, everybody knows this one, Jaws, right? That you're going to need a bigger boat. And I'm going to segue for a second here. So the quote, you're going to need a bigger boat, kind of interesting. That was actually ad-libbed. That was not in the script. And it came from the fact that during the production, the crew and the cast had this barge that they had all the camera equipment on and everything floating beside the orca, right, the fake fishing boat. And it kept getting swamped because there was a lot of swells on the ocean while they were filming, and they were losing camera equipment to get swept overboard and so on. And every time something bad happened, they kept making a joke for months about, you're going to need a bigger boat, right? That was their sort of #1 quote. And Roy Scheider, in the scene where he sees the great white for the very first time, instead of actually reading his line, did this. And it, of course, became movie and pop culture history. And it's one of those, probably right up there with, Luke, I am your father, kind of, and I'll make you a, from Star Wars, and, I'll make you an offer you can't refuse from The Godfather kind of thing. And it's right up there in our sort of movie lore now. But the sentiment also holds true, right? You are going to need more services. You really do. You can't do this by yourself. That is not a criticism of your capabilities. It's just a reality statement. As the cyber threats continue to be more sophisticated and more challenging, and the compliance maze gets more and more confusing, you need help figuring out, where do I put my resources? Where can I best use my internal resources and leverage them, but at the same time find the external expertise that I need? And that's what Adlumin does. We have a managed detection and response service. So if you were to ask Gartner or one of these industry analysts, that's where they put us. But at the heart of what we do is a platform, a unified platform designed specifically for the mid-market, so that you can pull in all the tools and all the services and the things you need to do to protect your business and remain compliant. And we deliver this as a one platform, one license model, so that it scales for you as a customer. Because we know in the small to mid-market space, the last thing you need is to get some bill at the end of the year because you use more storage or your throughput, or you use more services than you thought, and now that's going to eat out of your following year's budget. We understand your business, we understand the challenges you face, and that's specifically what we've developed for you. It is also predicated on 3 sort of philosophical pillars. #1 is speed. It is a cloud-native serverless platform. We're up and running in 90 minutes, and after 90 minutes, usually it doesn't take that long, we're already identifying threats, we're already dealing with detections and alerts and so on, and that's happening in seconds and being remediated in minutes. We protect your visibility. You have the same access to our platform and your information, your data, that we do, and it's real time, so there is no lag. You understand exactly where you are as a snapshot or as a trend. So we have some customers just run the platform, others work with our MDR SOC service, so our SOC manages it for them, and in other cases we work with partners like Pine Cove that also provides that service too. And then it is contextually rich. So we're taking all of that security information. We give you the view of your threats, your at-risk programs. You instantly see, as soon as it's up and running, your network health, policy violations. We give you compliance insights. So now we know your business, and we know, hey, you're doing well here, but here you're out of policy. Here's what you need to do to fix. And it helps you determine, again, how you prioritize and where you put your resources. And we provide that real-time, one-click reporting. So at any time you can see it. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But I think what makes it most interesting is the unique DNA of our founders. So both gentlemen are NSA and military veterans, but what makes it unique is that one of them ran an attack squadron. So he was going after our adversaries. And then Robert, his partner, ran defensive teams, right? He ran the Marine Corps SOC as an example, and he was a cyber defender with the NSA. So they're opposite sides of the same coin and opposite sides of the same conflict. They're both red and blue teaming, right? So they had a unique perspective of how we could do this. So Robert was saying, okay, Tim, based on these tactics you're telling me you used, I'm going to automate a lot of the things like rule writing and policy building that are generally the hard part in a SIM, right? In a logging system. That's the tough bit to customize for your business. And we have a strong pedigree in a lot of different industries, like banking is a strong one as an example, and education. So we know how to tailor for those businesses. So this is what we deliver based on that. Our platform that I've talked about, that's the heart of what we do. It is independent. It can be decoupled from our managed services. So if you don't want to run it, we have a SOC that'll run it, or you work with your service integrators, right? With the partners like Pinecove. And then we also have these fully integrated add-on platforms. All of them are to help you consolidate your risk management services, because we know that's another issue, is that companies have so many vendors that they need like 60 or 70 different pieces, and it's killing them because they can't manage them, they can't maintain them. So we've tried to pull these things in. So we've worked with the best in breed, right? So we provide patch management and penetration testing, awareness training, file monitoring. So if you have to do integrity monitoring in, say, banking and healthcare as an example, and then we're coming out with a CISO portal to help you kind of build out your policies and plans and do assessments and gap analysis and those kind of things. So we know these are the top issues that customers face. We wanted to build a system, and we did build a system where they're all just integrated. You got them in one place, and it's bidirectionally valuable, because in the one hand, you've got a single portal to go to, a single source of truth, which just simplifies your life and consolidates those services. On the flip side, this gives us additional context in which to protect your business. So if our SOC is operating with you, we can see things like, hey, you have this vulnerability because you run this system, and by the way, it's not patched. So we can work on protecting that. We can make sure that it is properly defended. All right, so this one generally gets a chuckle. This is from Dodgeball, right? Patch Houlihan, the 7-time ADAA champion. I love that. It's the American Dodgeball Association of America. Movie's just brilliant. And he says, if you can dodge a wrench, you can dodge a ball. And when it comes to cybersecurity, that kind of holds, right? You want to plan for the worst and hope for the best, but you don't fire drill when the building's on fire. You want experienced people that have seen nation state attacks, gone up against ransomware gangs. I have negotiated with ransomware gangs. It sucks. It's a one-way negotiation. It isn't fun. So you want people who understand how it works. And that's what our security operations does, right? We triage within 30 seconds, we contain within 15 minutes, and we remediate within 30. And that is industry leading, right? We are doing this as quickly as we see them. They are coming in, and we're dealing with it. And we deal with every 90 days about 40 billion events. This number's actually gone up. Now, of which about, almost 100,000 of them are the really dangerous ones. And here's what I want you to take away from this. So many people look at that number and go, well, look, 100,000 is a rounding error against 40 billion. And you're right, except you got to look at the problem the other way around, which is you have to go through 40 billion events to find the 100,000 that mattered. That's the real trick. That's what makes this difficult. So think about all those inferential smoke signals, not fire, that I talked about earlier. You have to be able to sort through those and figure out which are false positives, which are just simple policy violations, which really don't matter that much, and then which ones you kind of go, hang on, you know what, this one doesn't add up. I can't correlate it with something else in the business that tells me what's going on. So, for example, when you see new accounts being created, that's one of the tactics that criminals use. Well, when you see those new accounts, can you go to HR and go, hey, can you tell me why there's these new people on Active Directory? Like, is that correct? Are these new hires? Or why did Mark suddenly have his privileges escalated? Now Mark can access all these critical infrastructure systems when, Mark does a different job. That doesn't make any sense, right? So understanding those things and then being able to bring it all together, right? Being able to pull from all these sources, the built-in services that we offer. So we offer free dark web monitoring. So we're already looking for stolen assets and credentials. We have a dedicated threat intelligence team. Doesn't matter if you use our platform or our platform and our SOC, you get our threat intel team. So we are hunting. We're coming in two different directions. We are hunting. So we are looking for the the unknown unknowns, the things we haven't seen before, or we now have new messages from various threat intel sources. So we're applying those rules and those investigations against the data in our system to figure out whether or not there's something in your environment, right? Have we seen this? And we pull all that information from your telemetry, from across your network, your cloud services, your endpoints, your users and groups, remote access tools, security perimeter devices, system logs, etc. It all comes in through an API, or if we don't have an API, a syslog collector. It all goes in, it all gets correlated so that we can investigate. And we respond. We can respond across those 4 major groups. So we can disable or reset accounts or force a password reset. We can disable remote access. We can do the same thing with cloud if they're trying to get into Google Suite or Office 365, whatever it might be, SaaS services like Salesforce and so on. We can block those, and then we can also manage endpoints. So just like your EDR, we can do that, except we're not just taking the forensics and the telemetry it creates. We are responding so that you don't have to go through all those logs. We can also do some amount of the recovery. So once we've seen this, we can auto update policies and rules on the fly. So we want to make sure that now we found a vulnerability or an exposure, I should say, that the bad guys have used. We want to make sure we can go back in and we can prevent them from doing anything with it, that they cannot just come back, because that's often what they do, right? There's too much heat, they'll just go away for a little bit, they'll come back a few days later and they'll see if nobody's noticed. And if you haven't patched a system, they're going to come straight back in again. We obviously work closely with our partners. We have multiple forms of notification, right? So we do ticketing, bidirectional ticketing. We have a war room in a very worst case if we do see a massive incident. And we have a portal. So anyway, you can go into the platform and you can figure out exactly what's going on. And you've got those reports, like I said. And that's an important piece. So I'm gonna come to reporting in just one second. But before I do, I want to talk a bit more about the threat intelligence team and the resources. This is why it's critical. The threat landscape constantly changes. It is constantly evolving. Old ransomware gangs disappear, new ransomware gangs appear. New vulnerabilities are discovered in the systems that we use. And often those vulnerabilities don't have a patch straight away, which means you have a window of exposure. This team of experts is constantly trolling publicly available information, and they're trolling our own, billions and billions worth of data points in our system, looking for other signs of threat or applying, we saw an attack on banking. All right, well, if I morph this, what would that look like against healthcare facilities or an educational institution? And they're looking for those kind of things. And they're also providing constant reporting. So when you see something major in the news, for example, like, I talked about DarkSide and Colonial Pipeline, or the takedown of Hive. When that happens, you can go in the portal, you can pull these reports and you know exactly who they are. So we're trying to help you be prepared and responsive to your stakeholders when they come along and say, what happened with this? Were we ever affected by Hive? When a massive event, like a tectonic event, like the pipeline occurs, could that happen to us? You're in a better position to be able to answer that question with confidence. So we're providing more than simply what a traditional MDR is. Number one, we are vendor agnostic. We don't require proprietary stack. If you use CrowdStrike or SentinelOne or some other endpoint, fantastic. We're not going to say to you, sorry, we don't support that one. Tough luck, right? And the reality is we can draw from everything and anything you have got. And if we don't have an API, we will likely be developing one, which means it will come out within weeks. And until then, we pull syslogs, right? We have a collector so we can get the generic information off of it. So when you think about our service and our platform together, we are providing the cybersecurity validation that you require. We're reducing your attack surface and your profile, your threat profile. We are helping you determine where your greatest risks are so that you can focus your resources. We are providing that threat hunting that is context relevant, that understands your business and takes that into reference when we're doing this. And we also have patented behavior anomaly detection. It's actually called user and entity behavior analytics. So we're not just looking at the sort of, normally we call firewall traffic in and out of your environment north-south. And then often endpoints are called east-west, right? Because they're moving back and forth inside your environment. We add this z-axis that is how all those pieces relate and are the way that they're interacting with each other, users on devices connecting to other devices or databases or whatever it might be. Are they doing something normal, right? Is this suddenly out of band? Mark generally connects to these systems from this trusted device on this ISP. And suddenly now he's connecting from a different device in a different part of the world at a wrong time of day, you know, the middle of the night for him where he resides. And he's now trying to access these systems that he never accesses. It can flag those kind of things. Again, these are the early warnings of the precursors of a significant, sophisticated, and targeted attack. And so we can catch that stuff. All right, so I think I had my last movie quote of the day. For those of you that throw this in the questions, yes, you will need a new cover on your TPS report. So from Office Space, right? And also make sure you wear your flare when you show up. It's important to understand that regardless of your industry, we have many of the compliance standards that you need. So for example, I'm just going to show you this one. This is, you know, education K to 12. So the REMS framework, we cover this, but we also do this for banking and for healthcare and more generic ones like CMMC and so on. And like I said, you've got real-time health compliance insights. You log in, this is what you see. You can automatically determine, you know, do I have stale passwords, right? Have I had people in to do work and they're done now, or, you know, or employees are come and go, and I have these exposed systems. These are the kind of things that criminals love and live off of. So you get that live view of your environment. We make the recommendations about what you need to improve your posture, and all of that's just as automated, right? These are the things you're generally having to pay consultants a lot of money to go in and to do. And when it comes to compliance, you're constantly chasing these things because you're mapping whatever compliance standard or control there is to whatever's actually happening in your environment. And we do that automatically. Like I said, we have all sorts of different frameworks that are automatically mapped and pop these reports for you. And you can do your own testing. Like if you want to go, you know, compare yourself to the FBI CGIS or the ransomware readiness tools, or PCI, for example, if you're handling credit cards, et cetera. We can make sure that you have that. But we also provide executive insights for your board. And like I said, your C-suite and your board who are becoming more and more interested in this stuff. All the audit reports and the security activities, so you know exactly what's going on. So from not just a security perspective, but an IT perspective, a lot of the hard, heavy lifting is done for you automatically. It's all in one place. And then of course, all the security activity, right? So all the investigations and the searches and violations and all that kind of stuff is right there for you. Oops, sorry. Well, no, we're back to the Hunt for Red October. That's right. So it wasn't. I was right about it's my last movie reference. So I'm gonna end with this. I have one more slide after this. But when it comes to cybersecurity, like I said early on, it's not an IT problem to solve. It's a business risk to manage. I get asked all the time, what do we need to do from that top level? There are a lot of good resources out there. From across the pond, the National Cybersecurity Center in the UK, it's their public arm of their intelligence services, just like kind of a combo of the FBI and the CIA and the NSA and others. They've got some really good resources. Of course, CISA, right, the public arm of Homeland Security, has lots of good essentials around how do you protect and so on. The other thing I'd recommend is the National Association of Corporate Directors. This one's often overlooked. It is a brilliant resource that explains fiduciary responsibility and risk and liability as it relates to cybersecurity and data breaches and so on. It's a great resource to have and to look at. But when I look at all of these and pick your framework, at the end of the day, there's 5 things you have to do. Are you aware of what the risks look like, right? Do you know what the trends are and how they'd attack you? What's going to appear at your front door or your back door coming after you, right? What's at risk? What assets do you have that need to be protected? And what are the contractual obligations around them? Can you demonstrate that you've built out a program and, with your budget and your resources and your policies and procedures and all that kind of stuff that's aligned to the first 2? Can you report on it? Because that's really the proof in the pudding, right? Can you demonstrate that what you're doing is effective, where you've found gaps, you've patched them, and you've been responsive? These are all the kind of things that insurers are going to catch and come at you with. And then lastly, be ready for an incident. Like I said, right? Plan for the worst, hope for the best. You've got to be able to dodge these wrenches so that you can dodge the ball, right? Understanding what's involved in incident response, making sure that each person, I have the board here, but every role, the board, the coordinators, the technical people, HR, marketing, your legal representatives, that everybody understands what they need to do. Because ultimately a good IR plan is not about stopping these things before they happen, because sometimes you can't. They're about responding to them in a way that you're going to make informed decisions based on timely information that are, and these decisions are designed to reduce the risk of negative business outcomes. That's what you need to do. So I think we've got a few minutes for questions, but I'm going to leave you with this final quote. Now, this one's not from a movie. This is actually from a friend of mine, Bruce Matheson, who was a quarterback for the Buffalo Bills. He also played for the Chargers as well. And Bruce was replaced by the little-known quarterback, Jim Kelly. But one night, sitting around his fire in Arizona, he said to me, we were talking about football, and he said to me, you don't practice until you get it right. You practice until you can't get it wrong. And when he said it, it was one of those, like, just a punch in the gut, right? Where I suddenly realized, I've been trying to talk about how to deal with preparation around cybersecurity, how to train and help your executives understand the risk, how to prepare with incidents and having the right policies and people in place. And he just nailed it, right? And this is what I want you to walk away with. This is the point, right? It's about muscle memory. It's about knowing what to do in the situation and practicing, because it is stressful, it is emotional, and it is human. It is not technical. Detection is a technical job. Response is human intuition and emotion. And the difference between controlling that and taking that out of the equation is going to create the difference between an incident, which gets mitigated, and something that becomes massively business disrupting. So with that, I'm going to pause here, and I'm going to pass it back to Holly. I know we've got about 10 minutes left, just to see if there's any questions that came in that I could answer for you while I'm here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. If anybody has any questions, please feel free to drop them in the chat. If you think of any later, we'll send this recording out, and you can just respond to the email with any and all of your questions, and we can respond that way as well.
So I will say, just while we're waiting for some of these to come in, and if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Please, work through Holly and work through Pine Cove Consulting, and we'd be happy to talk to you. We also do I do a lot of things like board briefings, executive briefings. So sometimes, I often say this, right? It's like sometimes you can say that the sky is blue until you're blue in the face. And it takes a consultant to come in and go, yeah, the sky is blue. And suddenly that's like some grand revelation, right? And everybody understands it. And it's a way of reducing the friction and moving forward. And, that's what we have to, if that's what we have to do, we have to do that. And we're more than happy to help. Our threat intelligence team and their resources are, a lot of the stuff that they have is public. So we do publish it. I'd be happy to send you any of that information. And then for you, those of you who are going to be at RSA, right, the sort of Super Bowl of cybersecurity, that is on in 2 weeks' time, April 24th through that week in San Francisco at the Moscone Center. We do have a booth. I believe it's booth number 1761. I think, in the South Hall, and I'd be happy to meet you there and see you there and give you a demo. And speaking of demos, we can also do, if you'd like a demo, we can absolutely do that. And you can just visit our website, adlumen.com, where you can sign up for one. And what we also offer, and with Pine Cove, is what we call a proof of value. And so POV means we actually, because the system is easy to set up, we deploy it in your own environment, and then that way you get to sandbox and kick the tires with your own data, and you get a feel for what's been exposed that you didn't know about, where you can make those improvements and what's actually happening in your environment. And it's usually a bit of an eye-opener. Again, that's not a criticism, it's just the reality is there's an awful lot of threats, there's an awful lot of issues that you have to deal with, and we're good at exposing those and shedding some light when you're stuck in the dark.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. I'm not seeing any questions. I know quite a few people were going to watch this webinar later. So as Mark said, there's lots of next steps. Feel free to reach out through their website. You can also respond to the email or even contact your account manager, whether that's Kyle Thompson, Rig, or Bass. So thank you all for attending. We appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.